Oh, the last thing we did, this New Harmony effort by Robert Owen. Interesting utopian socialist. We've had several religious movements taking place during this time. I think one of the big things is people felt lost with deism. Deism and rationalism doesn't provide a purpose for life. Later on, Sigmund Freud will talk about this. I mean, he's an atheist, but he says that science doesn't give you a reason to live. The scientific study suggests that the only thing that really drives humans is the pleasure principle. But that doesn't give us anything, and that the whole purpose of life exists only with religion. So we have lots of people here in the early 19th century who are looking for answers. And they're following different leaders who provide it for them. Some of them are mainstream and they follow of Charles Finney. Others in the cities take off after Anne Lee and the Shaker movement. By the way, the Shaker movement died out over time. Can you imagine why? They don't have kids because they're celibate. They did think that maybe they would adopt children and bring children into the community. But eventually the Shaker movement dies out over time. But lots of different ideas here about which ways to go, but humans are looking for feeling and meaning. You got the transcendentalists. There's just something going on in this time period. As we've got I think we've got two big factors. We've got the Enlightenment and rationalism being ultimately unsatisfactory for giving a purpose to life. And then you've got all the dislocations of the new market economy and the Erie Canal and people having to move around, and you've got whole societies in flux. And then you've got Robert Owen, who wants to mix both the ideas of socialism, which are emerging, the idea that industrial workers and the average people are being taken advantage of by the capitalist owners. And he thinks that his utopian society, interestingly, however, did not include religion, did it? But he believes that he can make a perfect society. The perfection of society is one of the big goals of this whole moral reform movement of this period. And the biggest thing, Americans become very interested in improving America. That is one of our cultural traditions in America, is to not let problems go by too long. And so we are perfecters. And this idea for you, the American Society for Promotion of Temperance, becomes the one biggest social concern of the 19th century, primarily for the Anglo population. The Anglo population are going to be these, what we sometimes call old stock Americans, the ones who came from Northwest Europe, from England and Denmark and Sweden and Norway and northern Germany. The Germans retained a lot of interest in alcohol, but the Anglo-Protestant community became increasingly anti-alcohol. They saw it as the greatest social sin and problem. That drunkenness led to depravity in families, it led to abuse in families, it led to poverty, entrenched poverty for communities. It was a life destroyer. Now, I want to break down a few things about this American Society for Promotion of Temperance. One of our themes during this period of time is also the creation of national institutions. The Democratic Party is a national institution. It's got a national headquarters for the Democratic Party. This is when we begin to see national reform efforts. We still have them with us today. Can you guys think of a national organization, any of them, that are what we call single issue programs? Any national organizations how about a health one? Can you think of any national health organizations that are trying to promote perhaps cancer research, or what can you think of?
Like American Cancer Society.
There you go. And some other ones? American Heart Association, MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. This is the beginning of that in American history. So the American Society for Promotion of Temperance, it's going to have a national headquarters. It's going to have professionals who oversee it. That means these people, by the way, they open up chapters around America. And the national headquarters will come up with all the campaign materials and ideas, and they'll get fees in from the different chapters that will support their incomes on the national level. And then they'll send out placards like this that they have printed, and they'll have you have a meeting. And the big thing that the Temperance Society did is they wanted people to sign pledges in communities. They'd go around door to door and say, would you, can you imagine somebody coming by and, would you pledge that you will not use alcohol? And then what do you do if you say, yeah, well, I'll sign your pledge. If you don't, then how are you going to be treated socially by that group? You're going to be like, this guy's not on the list. We're going to have to come back and visit again. All right, so here's their document here. Hue and cry, drunkard, you are a thief and a robber. You steal away your own respectability, your usefulness, and your integrity. You rob your family of their necessary means of support. You destroy the character for decency in their neighborhood of your family. You blast your children's future prospects in life. Drunkard, you are a public enemy. You bring a bad name upon working men generally and shut up the hands of any who would do good to the poor by showing before all men your base habits and brutal conduct. This whole idea of you shut up the hands of many who would do good to the poor. Some people they see somebody begging along the road and they think, well, do I give them money or not? Right? What's the question that comes to mind for some people as they contemplate giving somebody money? Can y'all see what they're talking about here? What's he going to do with the money? Right? Go get a big gallon of Mad Dog 2020 or something. I don't think they have that anymore. At any rate, so do we still have this organization? Probably not. But I will tell you this, that later on, as we go into the early 20th century and we pass the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, do you know what that does in 1918, 1919? Yeah, it made it illegal in the United States to use alcohol. And we repealed it eventually. We repealed it in 1933. But there was about a 12-year period where it was absolutely illegal in the United States to manufacture, transfer, or use alcohol. And that was a reflection of this growing trend in the 19th century. Now, there's plenty of Americans who don't agree with this, and they had a hard time getting it forward. But we still have organizations like this today. If you're driving into Knoxville, you see a billboard that says meth destroys families, right? Is that true? Meth destroys families? Absolutely, it is true. And it destroys lives and teeth and other things. And right? So we have this effort in America to reform things. Now, I don't have it up here, but another one of the movements in this period of time is the American Sunday School Association. And they are seeing the significance, importance of getting Sunday schools in churches. And these programs to try to increase morality among Americans, all which are going to help out for the society. All of these together become known as the Benevolent Empire. Benevolence is doing good for those in need. That's what benevolence is. A church might have a benevolence committee, right? Or a benevolence program. Americans have been pretty good about being benevolent. When we have a tsunami or a flood, we are big on donating and giving things to other Americans especially, and sometimes other parts of the world. That too. Now, the Benevolent Empire, one thing to tie it back around to this cult of domesticity is that it does begin to give women opportunities outside of the house. Remember that women were supposed to isolate themselves largely away from the public world. The public world was a rough and tumble world that men would engage in economic activity or political activity, and that women were supposed to go maybe visit another woman's house. I guess they shopped. They must have shopped, right? Somewhere. Or sent servants to do the shopping. But what begins to happen with the Benevolent Empire is women find that since their natural kind of sphere is moral authority in the house, and hygiene and cleanliness and moral uplift, they think that's a natural role for them to play in society outside the home. And so women organizations start forming, and they start building orphanages and hospitals and places, indigent workhouses. And here's an interesting thing I need you to explain. We're going to eventually overcome the cult of domesticity, right? It creates lots of obstacles for women entering into the profession. As the professions organize in the latter part of the 19th century, women are barred from the medical professions, from the legal professions, and all kinds of professional life. In the late 1800s, we're going to have the emergence of something called the New Woman. And the New Woman is going to be college educated, affluent, and wants to do something more with her life. They're having less children, and they want to have the intellectual experience that their male counterparts are having as professionals. Now, where did that group come from? Did they grow up overnight in 1890? And what I'm going to say is no, their grandmothers were the originators of that. Their grandmothers from the 1890s are the ones back here in the 1830s and 40s who are beginning to take an active role in the benevolent empire. Women get together, wealthy women in Boston, and they want to build an orphanage. And so they organize a nonprofit board for that. And they begin to get in money for it. They're doing fundraising. They begin to work with architects. And guess what many of the women who are officers of this begin to experience? Do they like the work? Is it interesting picking a site and seeing a project come up and walking in and seeing the wards develop? Can you get a sense of satisfaction out of a project like that? I think you can, right? I think that's what people look for. Many people look for a sense of accomplishment in life, and women are beginning to get a taste for the idea of accomplishing something beyond the household. Sometimes we see historians who have studied this period and looked at the records. Sometimes you'll have a church that's doing a project. They'll have a women's auxiliary, as it's called, because they have a separate group for women. And then towards the end, the men would want to come in and take over the project, and they would push them back and say, no, we want to pull this off ourselves. So one last thing I'll tell you. Because this has to do with moral reform and benevolence, it gives women a cover, you might say, to step outside of the expectations for women. You need cover, right? Otherwise you might get slammed as not being womanly or feminine. So as historians, we try to trace the development of things, why things come to be, what are the causation of it. And sometimes causation is over a rather long period. And so what's going to happen in the late 1800s, the groundwork is going to be set for it in the earlier part of the century. Now I'm going to give you an example of the biggest female reformer of the 19th century, and that's Dorothea Dix. Okay, so Dorothea Dix, born in New England on a small farm. Her father was a minister, but some biographical accounts say that there was an alcohol problem in the family and that she was abused as a young lady. Not clear who it was, but she ends up living with a grandmother in Boston. She moves out of her family, lives in Boston. Her grandmother gives her an education, and she plans to become a teacher. But because that's one of the professions open to women outside of the house. You could be a teacher or you could be a nurse. She ends up traveling to England and living with some people in England, and these people are all up about what we're doing with the insane in England. And up until this point in time, if somebody was absolutely out of their mind and was committing acts of violence and families couldn't control them, they would take them to jails and put them in their own cell and chain them to the wall. And this is a horrible treatment of human beings. And in England, in part of their reform movement, England is very much in the reforms during this period of time, they are beginning the thought of mental hospitals, where it would be a much safer condition for these people. Well, when Dorothea Dix comes back to America, and she's back in Boston, she starts teaching a Sunday school class outside of Boston. And one Sunday afternoon, after she teaches, she's going to stick around before she takes a train back, and she asks to see the local jail. And they're like, well, why do you want to go in there? She goes, I want to see what the conditions are like in there and what's going on. And she goes in, there's females and males in the cell, not the cells together, but in the jail together. And she asks if there are any, insane people. And they say, yes, they've got this guy down. And they take her down to it. And this guy's like naked. He's got just like a burlap sack for him. There's frost on the walls of the cell. It's cold. And he's covered with sores and stuff. And she comes out of there and she's horrified what she's seen in this jail. And so she becomes committed to the idea that we've got to create in Massachusetts something like what they were doing in England. And that is what we sometimes call this transatlantic experience that we're in, being associated so closely with England, even though we've broken off from them. Well, how are you going to do it? Who's going to pay for it? You want to go convince the people of a state that they need to spend a lot of money on building something new for a group of marginal people that society doesn't pay attention to? That's hard to pull off. But she becomes a committed reformer. A reformer is somebody who wants to change things and make it better. So she goes to the Massachusetts legislature and she wants to meet with legislators, and they're like, I can't meet with you. You can't meet with me. You don't know me. It'll cast doubt on your character to be meeting privately with me and other men. And she's like, can we get over this? Can we meet somewhere publicly that we can talk about this? And they finally agree to meet in a hotel lobby where they'll visit with her. If anything happens to her character, that's her problem. And she tries to convince them of need to do this. And it's going to take state funds. It's going to have a board of overseers. And they're like, really? You want to do this? And she takes them to see people. And she gets a chance to, she begins to write memorials. And she lines up public support ministers in New England who would begin to speak of it. She's working on something we call political will.